Valerius didn't wait for her silent plea. He hauled her into his private study, a tower chamber high above the northern keep, smelling of old parchment, frost, and his specific, dangerous musk of power. He released her with a suddenness that sent her stumbling back, her wooden cane clattering uselessly to the thick bearskin rug. He circled her once, the heavy thud of his armored boots echoing the rapid, terrified beat of her heart. She kept her face blank, her eyes wide, maintaining the ruse of the simple, sightless girl. But the lie was threadbare now, clinging only by habit. "I didn't need proof of your sight, Serafina of the vocal line," Valerius stated, stripping off his heavy fur cloak and revealing the lethal contours of his black iron breastplate. "My wolf knew the moment you arrived 8 years ago. Your silence is a shield, but it is too perfect. My black wolf senses the absence of effort, the intentional void where a terrified woman's frantic energy should be. You haven't been hiding. You've been practicing." He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her head to tilt back to meet the scorching glow of his amber eyes. "I am not here to punish you for your secrecy. I am here because I require it." He walked to a heavy oak pedestal and pulled back a velvet cloth, revealing an object that pulsed with a dull, sickly gray light, the amulet of silent dominion. It was the ancient artifact whispered about in hushed council meetings. This amulet holds the key to stabilizing the fractured northern territories, but it requires the first tongue to activate, a power I believed perished centuries ago, a power that can only be summoned by a siren of your blood. "Who has suppressed her voice until the very point of breaking," Valerius ground out, his jaw tight. His need was palpable, a raw alpha demand that cut through the air, mixing with the sudden, sharp scent of ozone. Serafina felt a dizzying pressure, the unmistakable sign of a mate bond aggressively seeking purchase, spurred by the urgency of his power. It wasn't gentle attraction. It was destiny forcing itself upon them. Valerius took her chin in his gauntleted hand, his touch surprisingly careful, though his words were absolute. "I know your trauma. I know why you fear your power. But the war is coming, and I will not lose my kingdom because the only woman who can save us is too afraid to speak." His shadow seemed to grow, enveloping the chamber. "From this moment, the lie ends. You are no longer a servant, and you are no longer blind or mute. You are mine, Serafina, and I demand that you shatter your silence." Serafina collapsed back against the cold stone hearth, her breath ragged. Valerius's words, "I know your trauma," had ripped open the carefully sealed wound she had carried for half her life. She pressed her fingers hard against her throat, trying to keep the secret locked inside, but the memory was already flooding her mind. 5 years ago, the shattered street. She was only 16. She was not a maid then, but a free woman of the lower city, cornered in a dark alley by 2 vicious, entitled guards demanding obedience. When one of them backhanded her, the shock was so profound that the control she had fought for since childhood dissolved. The power was not a shout, but a low, vibrating hum that started deep in her bones, a raw, crystalline sound that was the true siren's voice. The alley filled with a pressure so intense it felt like liquid glass. The pavement buckled. The very air shrieked. The guard closest to her did not bleed, but he crumpled, clutching his skull, his face a mask of silent agony as blood streamed from his ears. He never walked again. The sheer, unrestrained force of her power had been like a sonic cannon. She hadn't just silenced her attackers, she had broken them, and in doing so had broken herself. She fled, crafting the elaborate deception of deafness and muteness as the only way to guarantee she would never accidentally use her power again. Present, the tower study. The vision left her shuddering. She looked up to find Valerius watching her, not with pity, but with a predatory, calculating intensity. "The fear is understandable," he murmured, kneeling until his scorching eyes were level with hers. But that was raw, untamed panic, I require control. I need one word, Serafina. The lowest volume you can manage. Whisper the name of the artifact." He pointed to the amulet of silent dominion. She shook her head violently, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She couldn't. It would break something. Him, the room, her sanity. Valerius's hand moved, swift and sharp, pulling a small black dagger from his boot sheath. He pressed the tip, not against her, but into the velvet cloth covering the pedestal, just inches from the amulet. "One word, or I destroy the only thing that can save my people. Your silence will be the weapon that kills my kingdom. Speak." Trapped between the crushing weight of her past and the catastrophic future Valerius laid out, Serafina parted her lips, her throat seized, muscles unused for years resisting the act. A tiny, rusty sound escaped, followed by the softest expulsion of air she could manage. Dominion. The sound was barely a breath, but the resulting force was immediate and terrifying. The thick glass in the narrow tower windows did not shatter. It simply pulverized, instantly turning into a shower of crystalline dust. The oak pedestal beneath the amulet groaned, cracking down the center as the pressure wave of her single suppressed word slammed against the ancient stone walls. Valerius didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just stared at the wreckage. "Good," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Now you know what we are dealing with. And now you know what you are truly capable of." The sound of shattering glass and cracking oak was a declaration. Valerius wasted no time in capitalizing on it. Within the hour, Serafina was stripped of her worn servant's clothes and dressed in silks woven with the king's black and gold colors. A gown that fit her fragile elegance and made her look less like a servant and more like a captured prize. Her pale blonde hair, often concealed, was braided with threads of obsidian. Her wooden cane was nowhere in sight. Her new station was consultant to the crown on ancient artifacts. Unofficially, she was the silent oracle, placed strategically at Valerius's side during the midday court session. The transition from the cold, isolated kitchen to the gilded, crowded throne room was agonizing. Every gaze was a blade, and Serafina felt utterly exposed. The court buzzed with fury and confusion. Who was this sudden blonde apparition who stood upright, whose eyes tracked every movement, and who was afforded the king's shadow? The primary source of that fury sat at the head of the high council table, Elder Torvin. Torvin was a man whose gray hair and weathered face belied the viperous ambition in his cold blue eyes. He was the most powerful alpha beneath Valerius, and the one who had been whispering loudest about the need for the king to take a suitable Luna and produce an heir. Torvin, and his faction of powerful territorial wolves, believed Valerius's obsession with the amulet was a distraction from his duty. As Valerius formally announced Serafina's new, non-existent title, a chilling tension settled over the room. Torvin rose slowly, his voice laced with venomous respect. "Your Majesty, we understand the necessity of historical expertise. However, to elevate a woman whose origins are unknown, whose history is veiled in silence, and who was until moments ago cleaning the scullery, sets a dangerous precedent. What assurance do we have that the mute girl is not a spy, or worse, a lunatic?" Serafina felt her control falter. The desire to scream, to lash out with the destructive power she had just unleashed, was overwhelming. Valerius felt it too. He simply reached out and placed his heavy, armored hand on the bare skin of Serafina's neck, not squeezing, but applying just enough pressure to anchor her, the mate bond asserting its authority over her fraying control. The shadows in the room deepened instantaneously, pressing against the corners of the hall like a suffocating blanket. "The only precedent being set, Elder Torvin," Valerius's voice resonated, slow and cold, "is that my decisions are not up for council debate. Serafina's origins are irrelevant. Her usefulness to the crown is absolute. Her loyalty, now, is mine." He lifted his hand, the oppressive shadows receding but the threat lingering. Torvin bowed, but his calculating stare as he looked at Serafina was a promise. The Elder would not fight the king directly, but the silent oracle had just been marked as the Black Heart's first target. The training didn't happen in a dusty training yard or a quiet library. It happened in the tower study, amid the wreckage of Chapter 2, where the risk of failure was absolute. Valerius made her sit across from him, cross-legged, the amulet of silent dominion resting on the rug between them, its sickly gray light a constant reminder of the kingdom's peril. "Your power is sound. My power is absence," Valerius explained, his gaze locked on her throat. "You create, I consume. To control the amulet, we must merge the two, the sound contained within the shadow. Now speak the word again. No matter what happens, you must not move." Serafina closed her eyes, dredging up the smallest sliver of the siren's voice. She whispered, "Dominion," and the air immediately began to whine. The crystalline force of the sound slammed forward like a physical wave. This time, Valerius was ready. He lunged forward, not in defense, but in a lethal embrace. His body pressed against hers, pinning her to the stone floor. Crucially, his shadow power erupted, a thick, suffocating tide of black energy that didn't attack the sound, but enveloped it, absorbing the sonic vibrations into his own aura. The effect was instantaneous and agonizingly intimate. The internal pressure of her voice, instead of escaping outwards, was violently forced inward, channeled through Valerius's chest and into the raw, exposed nerves of their burgeoning bond. She felt the searing heat of his wolf, the cold, demanding essence of the Black Alpha, while he simultaneously felt the crystalline despair of her 5 years of self-imprisonment. The forced intimacy shattered her remaining defenses. A raw, choked sound, neither a word nor a cry, tore from her lips, and it was in that moment of profound mutual vulnerability that the mate bond broke through. It wasn't a gentle recognition. It was a smash. A black spike of pure shadow shot from Valerius's core, meeting a blinding wave of gold, resonant energy from Serafina's. The spike didn't pierce her. It interlocked, violently snapping into place. Serafina arched back, gasping. Her mind momentarily merged with his. She saw his secret, the crushing weight of his kingly duty, the ghost of his last attempt to save his people, and the terrifying, bottomless need for her unique power. She felt his desperation. When the dizzying merge sensation retreated, Valerius released her, rolling off and resting on one knee, breathing heavily. His eyes, normally a sharp amber, were now swirling with gold and a deep, resonant black. "That was not control," he rasped, his voice rough. "That was the bond claiming us both. You use sound, I use shadow. Now the two powers are inextricably linked. We have a mating bond, Serafina, and it is unbreakable." The unbreakable bond, though terrifying, gave Serafina a terrifying clarity. She now knew Valerius's motives were rooted in duty, not malice, but she also knew he would sacrifice anything, including her, to achieve his goal. That night, Valerius did not take her to the amulet's hidden chamber, but to a narrow, forgotten sublevel beneath the dungeons. They pressed themselves into the cold shadows of a stone archway, hidden by a cloak of Valerius's expertly controlled darkness. The air down here was thick with the scent of pain and fear. A small, crude ceremony was underway in the center of the chamber, orchestrated by Elder Torvin himself, surrounded by his most loyal, hulking wolves. Torvin stood before a pedestal upon which rested a replica of the amulet of silent dominion, a dark, vibrating husk of power. Chained before it was a terrified beta wolf, whose eyes were wide and red-rimmed. "Speak the ancient word, dog," Torvin snarled. The beta wolf, whimpering, forced out a desperate, weak whisper. "Dominion." The resulting reaction was sickening. Instead of a controlled sonic wave, the amulet vibrated wildly, and then unleashed a violent, chaotic scream of pure static energy. The beta wolf collapsed, convulsing, his body visibly strained as the sound tore through his internal structure. He wasn't broken instantly like the guard from Serafina's past, but his voice was audibly, permanently damaged, reduced to a hoarse rasp. Torvin cursed, kicking the collapsed wolf aside. "Insufficient. The power is too diluted. Find me a stronger male." Serafina gasped silently, clutching Valerius's arm. Her terror was replaced by cold, righteous fury. She had seen the truth. They weren't trying to activate the amulet. They were trying to break it through brute force. Valerius's voice was a barely perceptible rumble in the darkness next to her ear. "The amulet has two functions, Serafina. It requires the controlled, purest voice to be a stabilizing talisman for the entire territory. But if it is activated by raw, diluted wolf power, like that poor beta's scream, it doesn't stabilize. It silences." He gestured to the convulsing beta with grim purpose. "Torvin doesn't want to use the amulet. He wants to weaponize it. That chaotic resonance doesn't just damage the speaker. It sends out a massive territorial sound wave that suppresses the wolf spirit and breaks the voice in every wolf in the 5 territories. Torvin believes that if he controls the artifact and silences every dissenting voice, he will control all the territories. He aims for absolute tyranny." Serafina looked down at the unconscious beta, the reality hitting her harder than the mate bond's shockwave. Her choice was never about her own safety. It was about whether the whole northern kingdom would live in permanent, enforced, agonizing silence. She had to speak, or Valerius's kingdom, and every wolf in it, would fall to Torvin's terrifying silent dominion. The true amulet was not in the dungeon replica room, but in the most ancient, isolated chamber beneath the keep, the vault of First Alphas. Valerius led Serafina through a maze of hidden passages, his black armor shedding particles of shadow to cloak their movements. The final door was a massive slab of basalt, sealed not by iron but by an arcane inscription that glowed faintly. "Torvin knows I have the key, but he doesn't know where the vault is located," Valerius whispered, pressing his armored hand to the stone. "He is waiting for us to make our move. We must be quick." Serafina stood before the door, feeling the powerful, humming silence trapped behind the basalt. This was the moment of truth. She drew a shaky breath, preparing to speak the controlled, calming note Valerius had taught her to stabilize the amulet. She focused on the mate bond, letting Valerius's icy resolve anchor her trembling siren power. Her lips parted to form the single stabilizing syllable, but before the sound could escape, a low, scraping sound erupted from the tunnel behind them. "Going somewhere, we... Your Majesty?" Elder Torvin and 4 of his largest enforcers blocked the narrow passageway. They were armored, their weapons drawn, their faces twisted into expressions of triumph and self-righteous indignation. Torvin held a flickering tallow lamp high, illuminating the vault's forbidden entrance. "You seek to activate the weapon alone, Valerius," Torvin boomed, his voice echoing, giving Serafina a painful jolt. "To become a tyrannical king of silence. But we have watched you. The maid was not mute, and her silence was merely a means to the power you desire. Your claims of duty are a lie." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Valerius reacted instantly, shoving Serafina behind him. "Silence, traitor. This is not the amulet of tyranny, but the only hope for stabilization." "Stabilization?" "You dragged a common kitchen slut into your private chambers, trained her in secrecy, and now seek to use her forbidden, chaotic voice to control the whole territory," Torvin sneered. He pointed a shaking, accusing finger at Serafina, who felt the stares of the enforcers strip her bare. "Look at her! The blind beggar is a siren. The king is consorting with forbidden power for his own gain. You forfeit the throne, Valerius," Valerius roared, drawing his massive shadow-forged sword. "The only thing I forfeit is your life, Elder." The Elder's trap was sprung. Torvin stepped back, letting the 4 heavily armed enforcers advance on the king, blocking the vault entrance entirely. Serafina was pinned, paralyzed by the sudden public exposure of all her secrets. Valerius was alone, fighting a heavily favored political ambush, while the very power that could save him, her voice, was locked behind a debilitating, terrifying wall of fear and the raw, violent mate bond. The sound of Valerius's shadow-forged sword meeting the enforcer's steel was a deafening clang in the confined tunnel. He was an Alpha King in the prime of his power, a whirlwind of black iron and blinding speed. But 4 large wolves in armor, fighting with the fanaticism Torvin had instilled, were a devastating challenge in the close quarters. Valerius fought with the desperation of a cornered beast, his power fueled by the mate bond's frantic need to protect Serafina. His shadow consumed the flickering lamplight, turning the tunnel into a chaotic dance of darkness and silvered steel. He took down the first enforcer with a brutal downward slash, but the momentary hesitation, a primal awareness of Serafina trapped behind him, cost him dearly. The lead enforcer, a hulking brute named Kale, seized the opportunity. Kale didn't swing his axe at Valerius. Instead, he hurled a palm-sized, glowing crystal, a dark, concentrated sphere of anti-magic aimed squarely at Serafina's chest. It was a crude attempt to neutralize her. Valerius saw it coming. A silent warning screamed through their mate bond. He didn't have time to dodge or counter. He spun, throwing his body in front of hers. The crystal struck the side of his black iron breastplate with a blinding flash and an agonizing thud. The armor, though thick, was not impervious to anti-magic. The shadow energy Valerius constantly wore recoiled violently, and the impact drove a jagged shard of metal deep into his side, just beneath the ribs. Valerius staggered back, a thick, coppery scent of alpha blood immediately filling the air, mingling with the stone dust and sweat. He collapsed heavily against the basalt door, his sword clattering as his strength evaporated. His eyes, fixed on Kale, were now dulling, the amber light fading beneath a sheen of pain. Elder Torvin, having watched the entire exchange, stepped forward, his expression victorious. He kicked Valerius's sword away. "There it is, Siren," Torvin hissed, grabbing Serafina by the arm, his grip bruising. "The king is broken. Your protector is nothing but a bloody carcass. Now use your voice. Scream for him. Cry. Prove to us you are nothing more than a hysterical, chaotic weapon who destroys everything she touches." The psychological assault was precise. Serafina felt the familiar, paralyzing terror, the memory of the shattered street and the broken guard rising up like bile. Her throat locked. She couldn't sacrifice Valerius, but she couldn't risk the whole territory either. Valerius, his face pale and slick with sweat, struggled to lift his head. The sight of Torvin's hand on her arm sent a final surge of protective black energy through the mate bond. He looked into her eyes, his lips barely moving, but Serafina, tied to his dying wolf essence, understood the silent command delivered by their shared pain. "Speak. Not for me. For the vault. For Dominion." With a final, desperate exertion, Valerius used his free hand to sign a single sharp word in the ancient non-verbal Alpha tongue, a command she had learned in their training. Sound. The sight of Valerius, the immovable Alpha King, bleeding out at her feet, was the final, devastating pressure that broke the dam of Serafina's fear. Torvin's cruel hand on her arm, the memory of her own destructive past, and the king's silent, dying command converged. She had a choice: unleash chaos and destroy the traitors, or find the control Valerius had desperately tried to instill. As Torvin waited for her terrified scream, Serafina closed her eyes, shutting out the blood, the betrayal, and the terror. She plunged inward, seeking the center of the mate bond, feeling the cold emptiness of Valerius's shadow trying to hold back the tide of death. Destruction is chaos. Creation is control. She found the pure, ancient resonance of the vocal line. a humming frequency that wasn't designed to shatter glass but to weave the very fabric of magic. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer pale blue but burning gold, a mirror of the power she had finally embraced. Serafina didn't scream or whisper. She began to sing. It was the Siren's Aria, the first tongue, a perfect controlled note that resonated at the frequency of binding. It was the antithesis of the chaotic scream Torvin wanted. The sound didn't break the stone walls. It flowed like liquid gold, perfectly contained by the shadows Valerius had anchored to her through the bond. The immediate effect was miraculous and terrifying. The raw, bleeding wound in Valerius's side, where the shadow power had recoiled, suddenly sealed. The crystalline sound wove the torn flesh and metal back together, leaving behind only a faint, shimmering gold scar. The mate bond flared, blazing into absolute finality, linking their survival. Torvin recoiled, clutching his ears, not because the sound hurt him physically, but because it exposed him. The pure resonance stripped away the layers of his political corruption and revealed the pathetic, ambitious wolf beneath. His power, and that of the enforcers, dissolved instantly, their wills reduced to ash by the sheer, undeniable authority of the first tongue. The song crescendoed, not in volume, but in complexity. The golden sound moved past the kneeling traders and washed over the basalt door of the vault of First Alphas. The dark, faint inscription over the door, the protective ward, suddenly pulsed, absorbing the entirety of the area. The note broke, and silence returned, heavy and profound, but utterly peaceful. The basalt door, instead of opening to reveal the amulet of silent dominion, fused completely with the cavern wall. The amulet was sealed away, its power neither used for tyranny nor necessary for stabilization. Now that the king and his queen of sound were bonded, Valerius pushed himself up, his eyes wide, no trace of pain remaining. He was whole, stronger than before, his black armor now accented by faint, shimmering lines of gold where the sound had healed him. He looked at Serafina, not as a tool, but as his queen, crowned by the golden light of her own power. Torvin and his enforcers remained kneeling, their power neutralized, their rebellion utterly broken by a single controlled song. Serafina, breathing easily for the first time in 8 years, had spoken, and in doing so she had saved the king, sealed the greatest weapon in the realm, and claimed her destiny. Weeks later, the northern keep was still humming with the aftershocks of the revelation. Elder Torvin and his faction were imprisoned, their attempted coup dismantled by a woman whose greatest weapon was her voice. In the aftermath, there was no longer a question of Serafina's place. The mate bond was absolute, her power undeniable, and the king owed her his life. The coronation ceremony was held not in the dark, cavernous throne room, but outdoors, in the high courtyard where the sun could reflect off the endless snow. Valerius stood tall, his shadow power settled and calm, no longer desperate, but grounded by the brilliant gold resonance that now emanated from Serafina. Serafina, dressed in a white gown woven with gold thread, walked with a purposeful, powerful stride. There was no cane, no hesitant step, and no averted gaze. When the high priest presented the crown of the North, she spoke, not the practiced whisper of their training, but a clear, resonant affirmation that carried across the frozen tundra. I, Serafina of the vocal line, take thee, Valerius of the shadow forged, as my king and mate. Valerius returned the vow, his voice rich with authority and pride. I, Valerius, take thee, Serafina, as my queen and mate. My kingdom is your voice, and my shadow is your shield. The cheer that erupted from the loyal wolves was thunderous, an acknowledgement of the true power that now reigned over them. The age of secrecy was over, the age of sound and shadow had begun. Later that evening, cocooned in the comforting coldness of Valerius's private study, now rebuilt with magically reinforced glass, Serafina was going through the confiscated documents from Torvin's private files. She found a single heavy scroll bound with dark, unfamiliar leather, hidden at the bottom of a locked chest. Valerius, watching her with a possessive ease that felt startlingly natural, took the scroll. He broke the seal, and together they read the archaic script. It was a letter, penned not by Torvin, but by an organization named the Veiled Collective, dated years before Torvin's rebellion even began. To the agents of the Northern Keep, your mission to silence the Siren child is complete. The fear of her power is now internalized. This ensures the survival of our pact. The goal was never protection from chaos, but prevention. The prophecies are clear. The Shadow King of the North may only be defeated if he successfully mates the Queen of the South, whose bloodline is the key to the 5 territories' true liberation. Keep the vocal line broken, or all our labor fails. The South cannot rise. Serafina looked up at Valerius, her golden eyes wide. The danger wasn't over. It had only just become global. The threat was not the amulet or Torvin, but the simple, terrifying fact that she and Valerius were now mated. "The Queen of the South," Serafina whispered, her voice steady and ringing with new power. They were trying to keep the King of the North from mating the Queen of the South. Valerius, his gaze cold and calculating, wrapped his arm tightly around her. "Then we have far more to worry about than a power-hungry elder. Our union was not the end of a prophecy, Serafina. It was the beginning of a war."